Hi, so one of the first things that we look at when assessing student data is to look at their attendance records. Their attendance records kind of help us see patterns in their absences, and for example, are they absent for a medical illness? Are they absent for logistical reasons like getting transportation to school? Or is there an interruption in home life that's impacting a child's ability to get to school? We also look at when those absences are occurring. Do they happen in the first semester or the first quarter? Are they happening more towards the end of the school year? Are they happening, around spring breaks or winter breaks for family travel, things like that? But then we also need to look at how often or how frequently the absences are happening. If they miss more than 10 days a year, it's considered chronic absenteeism, and it can impact the student's learning. So it's just something that we need to consider when we're trying to figure out, where are the students' challenges and how can we help them. Something else we consider are Tier 1 supports. So Tier 1 supports are supports that students in the general education receive, all students in the general education setting receive, and they usually receive it from the general education teacher. These students are generally showing progress towards grade level standards, and they don't need specialized instruction, and they don't need to work on targeted skills. They're just moving fine with what they're provided in the classroom. And then the next thing we look at are screening assessments. These are just brief assessments that a teacher can give to see if a student is showing progress in a specific skill. Often these skills are necessary for them to show progress with grade level standards. So the screening assessment shows that the student is scoring below average in those skill areas. Then the team will have to consider them for maybe Tier 2 supports. These skills can be anything for looking at like reading skills, including fluency, phonics, word identification, comprehension. We can look at writing. So are they writing complete sentences? Do they understand sentence structure? How is their spelling? And then we can also look at math. So do they know their multiplication facts? Can they add and subtract fluently? Can they solve word problems? So those are all skills that students need to continue to show progress in the classroom. And we use those screening assessments to determine that. That's one of the things we use. And then the next thing is Tier 2 supports. So Tier 2 supports occur when a child is not showing progress with Tier 1 supports. So they're in the general education setting, but they're scoring below average for grade level standards. So for 6 to 10 weeks at a time, we'll move them to Tier 2 supports, and then we are focusing on targeted skills. So if they're scoring low in fluency, we're going to work on phonics and work decoding multisyllabic words, and we're going to practice reading passages to improve their fluency. And then the student also will receive more progress monitoring. So, we're going to check their progress every week instead of every quarter in a Tier 2 setting. Okay, so today we are talking about Jordan. We got some parent notes from Jordan's parents, Maria and David, and they say that his strengths are tied with his interests. So if it's a topic that he's interested in, he tends to stay focused and engaged, and he'll work really hard. And he's very motivated. He really likes doing creative projects, science projects, and he enjoys drawing. Parents do report that, he avoids independent reading. He does enjoy being read too, but when he's asked to read by himself, it does get to his frustration level. Maria and David noted that, they've noticed he guesses at unfamiliar words instead of trying to sound them out. And then he struggles to recall details from a reading passage, so he's struggling with comprehension. And then they say, during homework time, reading assignments tend to take longer than his other assignments. So overall, reading is a struggle for Jordan at home. Attendance. So Jordan has been present at school for 86 out of 92 days, which puts his attendance rate at 92%. He does not show signs of chronic absenteeism because he's only missed 6 days. On the days he was absent, it was either for an illness or a family event that, his family chose to pull him out for. Overall, his attendance is adequate and it's not impacting his progress in the classroom. So Jordan started out with Tier 1 supports. In his Tier 1 supports, he was receiving instructions in the area of reading fluency, vocabulary, instruction, and corrective feedback. So the corrective feedback was kind of while he was reading, the teacher would prompt him with sentence starters so that he can start noticing his errors and correcting them as he goes. The strategy that most supported Jordan was the vocabulary instruction. So going over key vocabulary prior to reading a passage can help support comprehension, and he actually scored at the benchmark level for recalling details. But the teacher did note that she read to him for that assessment. He was not reading independently. And then also Jordan's interest in motivation or his engagement increased over time, which was supported through that corrective feedback. So he really thrived off of that, learning how to self-correct, getting that direct feedback from the teacher really supported his motivation because he's like, oh, I can do this. So his screening data, we did give him a few screening assessments to see where he was at with his reading. The first one is called the Nonsense Word Fluency Assessment. So this assessment is used to show how well a student reads unfamiliar words or nonsense words, so they're not real words. So he wouldn't be able to just guess the word. He has to actually decode them. The teacher noted that he read slowly and hesitantly, which impacts his fluency and his comprehension. Jordan guessed at words based on the first letter instead of sounding out the word or decoding it. So typically, if we notice that a student is putting more mental energy towards sounding words out, they don't have the mental energy or the mental effort to comprehend what they're reading. So that's why being able to decode words and reading fluently is really critical to comprehension. So that is a skill that he would benefit from having targeted in Tier 2 instruction. The next strainer we gave him was the oral reading fluency. This screen is used to see how many words Jordan can read accurately in a passage. It also assessed how many words Jordan can identify quickly. So he's just reading the words. He's not stopping and pausing to decode them. Though this task is difficult for Jordan, his motivation and ability to persist is strong. So he doesn't give up. He keeps trying. That being said, Jordan's pace is slow and labored. He struggles to he has to stop to sound out words. And then when asked to summarize the passage, he can give us some facts or details from the passage, but he struggles to recall what was the whole passage about, or what was the main idea. And then overall, Jordan is scoring below the benchmark in areas of phonics, fluency, and comprehension. So for the last 6 weeks, Jordan has been receiving Tier 2 instruction. And then we do progress checks every week when they're in Tier 2. After 6 weeks of Tier 2 supports, Jordan's performance level is at 71 words correct per minute. So on average, he's getting 71 words correct per minute. He increased his words per minute from 52 words in week 1 to 76 words correct in week 6. He's also shown progress in his errors. So errors are words that he read incorrectly in the passage. In week 1, he had 14 errors that he read 14 words incorrectly, and then by week 6 he only had 9 words that he read incorrectly. His teacher notes that he's reading with more confidence and is showing consistent progress. He's improved his sight word recognition, his fluency, and his willingness to self-correct. He will still need continued practice with multisyllabic words, building stamina, so being able to read longer passages for longer amounts of time, and then reducing the amount of words he reads incorrectly, so reducing his amount of errors. And then Jordan, though he's showing steady progress, he's still scoring below the benchmark scores at this time. So the next steps based off of this, it is so awesome that in tier 2 he's showing progress, but he's still not hitting that benchmark score. So I do think it would be beneficial for him for the next 6 weeks to continue tier 2 instruction, and then continue those weekly progress checks. Because if he keeps showing the steady progress, I believe that tier 2 supports will help him hit those benchmark levels. And then we can reconvene, meet again after 6 weeks of progress checks and see if he hits those benchmarks. It is possible, because he's showing steady progress, to move him into tier 1. But I really strongly encourage us to continue tier 2 for 6 more weeks and just see if we can get him a little bit higher. So yeah, that is my recommendation. Jordan's doing really good. He's a sweet kid. Being at school is important, and he's attending school regularly, and he's just motivated. He wants to do well, and we really appreciate seeing that in students. Yeah. Okay, so for my reflection, I tried to keep my explanations concise and simple. Tried not to use too much technical jargon that I just learned in my teacher prep program, and I doubt parents really know. I tried to explain any educational terms I use, such as screening assessments, fluency, and decoding. Like, I tried to explain that decoding means he's sounding out the words. Fluency means he can read quickly. Well, not quickly, but he can read evenly without stopping, without having to take breaks. And then I try to avoid terms like prosody, instead explain that we were looking to see if Jordan needed to stop and take breaks. Does he need to stop and sound out the word, or does he identify it automatically? Let's see. And then I also explain why decoding and fluency are important reading skills for comprehension. I've done 2 years of teaching SPED, and I've noticed that parents don't always understand, well, why is it important that they need to know phonics or fluency? I teach middle schoolers, so they're kind of like, why are we still practicing this? And I just think it helps to explain that if they're putting more thought into actually reading words, then they're not understanding what they're reading. And I've also seen our school psychologists present data this way, so I just feel like it's good practice to do that. And then for the visuals, I just chose to do an AI-generated infographic. I feel like it was visually interesting. I liked the flow and how it was organized. And then I think it just kind of was simple enough for parents to look at it and follow the information we're giving them. So yeah, that was how I analyzed the data and tried to explain it to parents. Thank you.